Welcome to our Euro trip 2021.
First, my mom flew out from SeaTac and I took a train so I could meet her at the Frankfurt airport where my mom arrived, but then a stranger asked me to record her meeting with her internet boyfriend for the first time when he got off his flight from Mexico. And his plane got delayed, so I stood there holding her camera for about an hour before my mom and I were finally able to head to our first destination, Cologne.
In Cologne, we went to the beautiful Christmas market under the cathedral, bought some gifts, had some glühwein, and listened to the live show.
We ended our night with some beers, and we waited for our late train, which would then take us back to Frankfurt, and then on to my city the next day, Freiburg. We hiked Schlossberg and all over the city. I showed my mom where I mostly hung out as a grad student. And then we went back to my apartment building.
Give that 10,000. Give that 10,000.
Here's Mom getting her 10,000 steps in since we'd had a less than active day with all of the travel, and I had a doner kebab.
Next, we took a bus to Switzerland for our flight to Sicily.
Never too warm. Mama, where are we? Bates-Mundell. A little bit wet.
This is the beautiful villa we stayed in with our own balcony and views of the Mediterranean right across the street.
We actually had the beaches all to ourselves because there was a bit of a downpour. But then the sun came out.
Here we are hiking over to the nature reserve just outside the city to check out the cliffs while the weather was nice. We also contributed a €1 entrance fee to a questionable local in his personal car who assured us as he pocketed the money that it was a required toll.
This was our final dinner in Palermo. My seafood risotto was freaking delightful. Mom wasn't as stoked about her meal. This picture isn't actually from our dinner, but we added it to spice up the narrative.
We met some cats, had some yummy morning treats, and then caught a flight to Rome.
We immediately saw these sneaky views of the Colosseum right down the road from our hotel, which was an absolute highlight for us.
Right after we checked in, we went for a stroll around the Colosseum, and it was just us and a few vendors, so we could really take it all in. Neither of us could believe we were truly here. It was just as magnificent and impressive as we had always imagined.
We went pretty hard with the metro to get as many sights in as possible while in the city. Here's Mom having somehow accidentally snuck past the card machine, but still stamping her card because not all American tourists are shady.
We continued our night stroll to take a peek at some of the other centrally located ruins in the city. Basically, any free moments we had, we took advantage of to check out whatever ancient historical monument was always within walking distance. You'd turn a corner and it would literally be straight out of a history book that I had been teaching.
We decided to begin our gelato tour here in Rome, and it did not disappoint.
We had an unexpected wildlife encounter on the walk back to our hotel. The next morning, we had a tour booked to Pompeii and then Naples. Because it was the off-season, it was only us and one Spanish couple on the tour.
So our guide quizzed us as we drove past the infamous gladiator training school in the shadow of Mount Vesuvius, and he asked, "Does anyone know the name?" And Mom did.
Capua! We arrived at Pompeii.
It really looked like you could take about a week to search through all the streets. And seeing Mount Vesuvius was crazy.
We toured through many villas and theaters, the Forum, the brothels, the House of the Tragic Poet, saw some of the incredible frescoes, and just really enjoyed getting lost in the city for as long as we could.
We actually went to Naples after this, but it was pouring rain, so we didn't take any pictures and actually spent the majority of our 2 hours waiting in line for a specialty pizza that had been recommended to us.
We started our next day heading across Rome to enter the Vatican City.
It was ornate and intimidating, and unsurprisingly, the Sistine Chapel was the standout for us. Of course, it was completely breathtaking.
The line at St. Peter's was a little long, so we had some refreshments. And then things got interesting.
Mom had left her phone in the dark tour bus the night before, and after some maneuvering, I located it, and they said we could come pick it up from a bus depot that was on the far opposite side of Rome. These clips are actually from Palatine Hill, which we checked out later that day, but we figured they're a lot more appealing than my sweaty race to the bus depot.
So we took a few metros and zoomed in that direction to pick up the phone and make it back to the Colosseum on the other side of the city for our tour.
Ended up sprinting for about 2 miles in my very thick sweater, but I collected the phone, we made it back to the Colosseum in time, and Mom was so grateful she bought me a beautiful new pair of boots as a thank you. My boots had been through the ringer and were always filling up with water all trip, which was not super convenient.
We got to go right up to the main floor of the Colosseum and just stood there in awe for the entirety of our tour. And that's us in the Colosseum. Pretty unbelievable. We hit up a few other classic sites that night, like the Trevi Fountain and the Spanish Steps.
Oh, and these are the boots that I earned through my sprint across the city. We had dinner, and I had the best pasta of the trip, which I'm now fully obsessed with. Next morning, before our train, I raced over to catch St. Peter's as it opened, which was stunning in the rising sun. It was just me and about 15 nuns up early, and we had the place basically all to ourselves.
A quick peek at the Pyramid of Cestius, which serves a dual purpose as a traffic roundabout, and then we were off to Tuscany.
We arrived in Florence that evening and carried our luggage across the city and then had dinner in the Mercato Centrale.
We showed up for the wine tour with empty stomachs, so we quickly ran to the nearest shop and got doner kebabs before it was time to board our bus.
And then we headed out into the countryside to try a few different famous Chianti vineyards scattered across the region.
Vostra scelta, io posso dirvi che in questa cantina è molto buono il rosé, è molto buono, sono molto buoni i super toscani, quindi ho provato in 4 anni del mio lavoro più di 30 cantine, quindi un pochino me ne intendo.
The wine was phenomenal, and the views and sunset were just gorgeous.
Mom got along super well with the owner of one of the vineyards and hit it off with her non-English speaking Nona, who, despite our language barrier, really appreciated our enthusiasm for their incredible wine selection.
The next day, we grabbed some food and then headed to the surprisingly inconspicuous Galleria dell'Accademia for our Michelangelo Appreciation Day.
We were pretty obsessed with the statue of David. He ended up being quite the stunner. We couldn't actually get into the Duomo, but we cruised around the city, saw some Santa Clauses on pause, and had some highly rated tiny gelato.
Here we are at the Piazza di Michelangelo viewpoint. They said they were performing an endoscopy on the outdoor statue of David replica on the hilltop in order to learn more about the materials used and conduct a proper restoration.
We cruised across the Ponte Vecchio, the only bridge in Florence that survived World War II.
We saw some very active Santas and then got ready for our trip to Venice the next day.
We arrived in Venice the next morning, and due to an unforeseen water taxi strike, we had to cart all of our luggage for about 1.5 miles across all the bridges and endless cobblestone paths.
We stayed in a very sweet old building with tons of space, an elegant outdoor courtyard, direct views of the canal from our living room, and even rain boots for flood navigation.
Right around the corner from our place was a restaurant that our host had recommended, and we had some phenomenal salmon gnocchi there.
And of course, we had lots of complimentary grappa and limoncello.
We walked around for some stunning sunset views and checked out most of the main go-to sites.
In the morning, we headed out to the islands, Murano and Burano, to check out some of the glassware and all the unbelievable colors.
We made sure to stay refreshed and saw a huge aquatic nativity scene.
We had our last meal and our last aperols under the Rialto Bridge and enjoyed navigating the complex maze of streets and canal pathways back to our rooms.
We had a crazy morning of dragging luggage back across the bridges before the sun rose, catching the water taxi, which was running this time, thankfully, and then catching a train to mainland Venice, then a train to Verona, and finally heading to Munich, all before midday.
We arrived early for our train to Verona, but almost lost each other as our train changed platforms about 2 minutes before departure, and we had to take off sprinting through the station.
I ditched Mom to run ahead with the massive suitcases and held the doors of the train open. Meanwhile, Mom got stuck behind someone and the police had to help her find me, but we made it in time.
So that was the only time in this trip that I was ever close to tears. However, we loved our Hogwarts Express-style cabins and couldn't take our eyes off the Alpine views that surrounded so many of the towns we passed through.
What the hell?
We had a classic first evening in Munich, getting Schnelltests, watching surfers at the Eisbachwelle, and then heading for massive beers at the Hofbräuhaus. Of course, we ate our Weisswurst Bavarian style to make sure we got that local nod of approval.
And the next morning, we headed off for our King Ludwig tour.
We saw Linderhof Castle first. This was Mom's first time seeing the castles in the snow, as they'd gone in the summer previously, but it was my first time ever.
We stopped in the beautiful town of Oberammergau and saw the fairy tale houses. Then we checked out the site and costumes used for the once-a-decade Passion Play, which was scheduled for the coming summer.
And then it was Neuschwanstein time.
His mother inside there because Ludwig was never married. So inside Castle Neuschwanstein every day. Can you imagine?
Oh. We were the last group to go in, and there were only 6 people allowed at a time to follow COVID regulations, so we really got a lot of time to ourselves in the castle.
The views were outrageous, the nature decor was top-notch, we loved the glass-paneled overhanging day rooms, and Ludwig turned out to be kind of a hottie.
We had to hustle down the walkway in the dark, but made it just in time to warm up with some Glühwein before heading back to Munich.
We rallied so we could go out again that night to have some of my all-time favorite German beer at the Augustiner Brewery.
And finally back to Freiburg. We had to change housing a few times, but found a place that could accommodate our luggage, saw some anti-lockdown protests, and enjoyed German Tex-Mex on our first night back.
I had a few things to sort through from my life over the past 2.5 years, so we spent quite some hours packing it down to make it fit in our baggage allowance.
We saw the classic Freiburg sights, and I tried a Lange Rote in the Münster market.
And then I got my diploma, and we celebrated outside the Herderbau, which was the location of my faculty where I had classes for the first and only semester that I got to be in person for my master's program.
And that was it. We said an emotional Bischspeter to lovely Freiburg and headed to the last leg of our journey, Freiburg to Frankfurt and Frankfurt to Seattle, just in time for Christmas Eve.